The first vine tightened around Evelyn Hartwell's wrist before anyone in Briar Hollow dared to say her name. Rain fell in thin silver lines over the village square, turning the packed dirt to black mud and blurring the torchlight into trembling halos. She stood barefoot before them all, her old ivory dress clinging to her knees, her ash-brown hair plastered against her pale cheeks, while two guards pulled her toward the forest path, as if she were something dangerous instead of a girl who had spent her life lowering her eyes and carrying baskets no one thanked her for. "Do not look so frightened," Marjorie Voss said from beneath the shelter of a dark green cloak, her voice smooth enough to sound merciful to anyone who had never felt its edge. "The sacred tree only takes what the pack can spare." A murmur moved through the crowd. No one challenged her. Not Elder Amos Greer, who clutched the ritual book to his chest with shaking hands. Not Tessa Whitcomb, who stood near the healer's steps with tears bright in her eyes and fear sealing her mouth. Not Caleb Voss, the acting alpha, who watched Evelyn with the same cold distance he had worn the night he rejected her before the pack and called it mercy. Evelyn's fingers curled around the silver locket at her throat. It was the only thing her mother had left her, a small tarnished oval holding a dry brown leaf pressed behind glass. Mara Hartwell had once said the leaf came from the sacred tree before its roots began to rot, before Briar Hollow forgot that holy things were meant to shelter the weak, not punish them. But Mara had been gone for 9 winters, and memory, Evelyn had learned, could be buried just like a body. "She brought the blight," someone whispered. "The sickness started after her mother died." Another voice answered, "Forgotten blood always turns sour." Evelyn kept walking because stopping would only make the guards pull harder. She had heard those words since she was 13, since the winter fever took the old healer and half the nursery coughed through the night. She had scrubbed floors, tended fires, wrapped bandages, carried water to mothers who would not meet her eyes. Still, every failed harvest, every stillborn lamb, every child's fever had found its way back to her. Forgotten Omega. Bad omen. Empty wolf. The girl the moon left unfinished. Ahead, the forest opened like a dark mouth. At its center rose the sacred tree, older than any pack law, its white bark twisted with living vines that glowed faintly beneath the rain. Evelyn had loved it once. As a child, she had hidden beneath its branches while her mother gathered herbs, listening to the soft hum in the roots and believing it was the earth itself breathing. Tonight, the tree looked wounded. Strips of cloth hung from its lower branches, offerings soaked through and sagging. Candles guttered at its base. The air smelled of wet leaves, smoke, and something bitter beneath the soil. Elder Amos cleared his throat. "Evelyn Hartwell, Omega of Briar Hollow, unclaimed and unprotected, you have been chosen to stand before the roots until dawn." Chosen. The word almost made her laugh, but there was no breath for it. Caleb stepped closer, his black ceremonial coat untouched by mud. "This is not cruelty," he said, loud enough for the pack to hear. "This is survival." Evelyn looked at him then, really looked, and saw not strength but fear dressed as authority. "If it is survival," she asked softly, "why does everyone look away?" For one heartbeat, silence held them. Then Marjorie's face hardened. "Bind her." The guards pushed Evelyn back against the pale trunk. The first vine slid over her arm, as if waking from sleep. Another crossed her waist. Another circled her shoulder. The touch was cold, then sharp, tightening just enough to steal the warmth from her skin. She did not scream. She would not give them that last piece of her. Instead, she lifted her chin through the rain and held her locket as long as she could, until a vine curled between her fingers and pulled her hand flat against the tree. Somewhere in the crowd, a child began to cry. Somewhere beyond the northern ridge, unseen by every wolf in Briar Hollow, a royal convoy moved through the storm. The ritual book opened with a sound like a wet wing. Elder Amos Greer stood before the sacred tree, rain dripping from the edge of his hood onto pages so old their ink had faded to brown. His voice trembled when he began, but not enough to stop him. When the roots darken and the children burn with fever, the pack must return what it has taken from the earth. One who belongs to no house, no mate, no protection, shall stand beneath the branches until dawn. Evelyn felt the words settle over her like another vine. No house, no mate, no protection. The law had been written for someone like her long before she was born, And that was the cruelest part. They had not needed to invent a reason to abandon her. They had only needed to find an old one. Marjorie Voss stepped closer, her dark green cloak brushing the mud, as if even the rain feared staining her. "The sacred tree has fed this pack for generations," she said, turning to the crowd with practiced sorrow. "Its roots are failing because something unclean has lived among us too long." Evelyn's breath caught, but she kept her eyes on the lantern at Elder Amos's feet. If she looked at the mothers in the crowd, at the men who had once accepted soup from her hands, at Tessa standing pale and silent near the path, she might remember too much. She might remember believing people could be frightened and still kind. Caleb Voss moved beside his mother, his broad shoulders squared for the audience. He looked every inch the acting alpha in his black coat and silver clasp, but Evelyn had seen him years ago behind the stables, shaking after his first failed hunt, too ashamed to face his father. She had brought him water then. She had promised not to tell. He had not remembered that promise when he rejected her. "Evelyn Hartwell has no claim on Briar Hollow," Caleb announced. "The bond offered by the moon was severed. I released her. The pack owes her nothing." The vine at Evelyn's waist tightened, and for a moment she wondered if the tree had heard him and disapproved. A small gasp slipped from someone in the back. Marjorie's eyes flicked to the sound, silencing it. "Until dawn," Elder Amos continued. "The chosen Omega will bear the sickness into herself. If the roots accept her, Briar Hollow will be cleansed." Chosen again. Evelyn wanted to ask why cleansing always seemed to require the person with the least power to suffer for everyone with more, but her throat felt too dry for defiance. Instead, she forced her fingers to move against the bark, searching for the locket. The silver chain had twisted beneath the vine across her collarbone, its small weight pressed painfully against her skin. "Please," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the rain softened with it, as if the night leaned closer. "Do not take my mother's locket." Marjorie turned slowly. For the first time that night, something like interest touched her face. Still clinging to Mara's trinkets? Evelyn's heart gave one hard beat. "It is mine. Nothing is yours after the binding begins." Marjorie reached for the chain. Panic rose faster than pain. Evelyn strained against the vines, not enough to break them, only enough to make the leaves tremble. "You can leave me here," she whispered. "You can call me whatever you need to call me. But not that." Caleb's mouth tightened, and for a flicker of a second, something human crossed his face. Then his mother looked at him, and it vanished. "Remove it," Marjorie ordered. Elder Amos hesitated. "The old rites warn against stripping a bound offering of personal tokens. The old rites did not save our dying children," Marjorie snapped. Her hand closed around the locket. The moment her fingers touched the tarnished silver, the sacred tree shuddered. Not loudly, not enough for the whole pack to understand. But Evelyn felt it through her spine, a deep ache from root to branch, like grief waking beneath the bark. The dry leaf behind the glass warmed against her chest. Tessa saw it. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted as if the truth had risen all the way to her tongue. Then Caleb stepped in front of her, blocking Evelyn's view. Marjorie pulled once, but the chain did not break. A thin line of pale light flickered through the locket seam, then disappeared. Around them, the candles at the base of the tree bent toward Evelyn, every flame leaning as if drawn by breath. Elder Amos went gray. "Luna Voss," he whispered, no longer sounding certain of the ritual at all. Marjorie released the locket as if it had burned her. "Begin the vigil," she said too quickly. "No one approaches her until dawn." The crowd obeyed because obedience was easier than courage. One by one, they backed away through the rain, leaving Evelyn bound beneath the trembling branches with her mother's locket still warm against her heart and one terrible question blooming where fear had been. If the tree truly wanted her sacrifice, why had it just tried to protect what she loved? The first hour of the vigil passed with the cruelty of something pretending to be mercy. The pack had retreated to the edge of the grove, close enough to watch, far enough to deny they were responsible for the girl tied beneath the sacred branches. Rain softened to mist, beating along Evelyn's lashes and the silver chain at her throat. The vines held her upright when her knees weakened, and she hated that even her prison seemed kinder than the people who had left her there. Then a small sound cut through the hush. Not a voice, a whimper. Evelyn turned her head as far as the vine across her shoulder allowed, and saw Tessa Whitcomb near the healer's steps, clutching a child wrapped in a blue wool blanket. Little Noah Pike, barely 6 years old, his cheeks flushed, his blonde hair damp with sweat. His mother, June, hovered beside Tessa, trembling so hard the lantern in her hand shook. "He got worse," June whispered. "He stopped answering me." Tessa looked toward the guards, then toward the dark line of trees where Marjorie and Caleb had disappeared to oversee the outer watch. "You cannot bring him here," one guard muttered. Luna Voss said no one approaches. "He is burning up," June said, her voice breaking. "The healers are out of fever root. Please." Evelyn's heart twisted. Noah had once left a bruised apple on her doorstep after other children threw stones at her laundry. He had run away before she could thank him, but she had remembered. Children were not born cruel. They learned it from frightened adults. "Bring him closer," Evelyn said. The guard stepped forward. "Be silent." Tessa's face tightened, and for one fragile moment Evelyn saw the girl she used to know, the one who had shared stolen blackberry jam with her behind the mill, before rank and fear taught them different forms of survival. "He is a child," Tessa said, so quietly it almost vanished. The guard scoffed. "And she is bound." Evelyn drew a shallow breath. The vine across her ribs made every inhale careful. "Lay him near the roots. I do not have to touch him." June stared at her, as if hope itself frightened her. "Can you help him?" Evelyn did not know. Her gift had never been strong in ways anyone respected. It came in small mercies, calming a frightened horse, easing a widow's headache, warming the hands of a baby too weak to nurse. After Mara died, Evelyn had hidden it. Kindness was safer when no one could name it. "I can try," she said. Tessa made her choice before courage could leave her. She carried Noah past the guard and knelt 3 feet from the tree. The boy's breath came fast and thin, his small fingers curled against the blanket. Evelyn closed her eyes, searching for the quiet place inside herself where pain became a language. At first there was only cold, rain, bark against her back, vines biting into skin. Then the locket warmed. Beneath the glass, the dry leaf glowed faintly, and something answered from the roots. Evelyn's hands were pinned, but her palms tingled as if sunlight had gathered there. "Noah," she whispered, "listen to me. Follow my voice." The boy whimpered. A pale shimmer moved through the wet grass from the tree to the blanket, so soft that only Tessa seemed to notice. Noah's breathing hitched, then deepened. The fever flush eased from his cheeks by a single shade, then another. June covered her mouth, tears spilling silently over her fingers. Tessa looked at Evelyn as if seeing her for the first time in years. Not cursed, not empty, not forgotten by the moon. "You saw nothing," Evelyn whispered, though her own voice trembled. "Take him before they come back." But it was too late. A twig snapped at the edge of the grove. Caleb Voss stepped from the mist, his eyes fixed not on the child, but on the fading light around the roots. Behind him, Marjorie's face had gone still with a fear she was too proud to show. "What?" she asked softly. "Did the Omega just do?" Marjorie's question lingered in the rain, but no one answered it. Noah Pike's breathing had steadied against his mother's shoulder, the fever no longer consuming him, and that single impossible change frightened the pack far more than his illness ever had. Caleb Voss strode across the soaked grass and seized Tessa Whitcomb by the wrist. "Tell them what you did." His voice carried the sharp edge of a man losing control. Tessa winced, but did not pull away. She looked instead at Evelyn, whose hands were still bound against the sacred tree, her pale face drawn with exhaustion, yet strangely peaceful. "She helped the child," Tessa said quietly. "That is all I saw." "That is not all," Marjorie replied before Caleb could speak. The tree answered her. "That should not be possible." Her eyes narrowed on the silver locket resting against Evelyn's chest. "Unless we have been sheltering something dangerous." The crowd shifted uneasily. Fear was easier to believe than gratitude. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men who had accepted Evelyn's quiet kindness for years suddenly searched her face as though it belonged to a stranger. Elder Amos stared at the glowing roots, his lips moving through forgotten prayers, but the certainty that had guided him only hours before was slipping away. Caleb released Tessa with a shove and turned toward the guards. "Strengthen the binding," he ordered. "If she is drawing power from the sacred tree, she cannot be allowed to break free." The guards hesitated. Even they had seen the child's fever ease. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. She was too tired to argue, too weak to fight, yet she knew exactly what would happen if they tightened the vines again. The tree would suffer with her. She could feel it now, every pulse beneath the bark echoing through her own heartbeat. Before anyone moved, a deep horn rolled across the valley. It was not loud, yet it carried with effortless authority, the kind that belonged only to those who never needed to prove they possessed it. Every conversation died instantly. A second horn answered from the northern road. Horses approached at a measured pace, their hooves steady despite the rain. Marjorie's composure faltered. Caleb's face drained of color. "The royal convoy," someone whispered. Panic spread through the crowd. Torches were lifted. Cloaks were straightened. The same wolves who had watched Evelyn bound without protest suddenly scrambled to appear respectable. Marjorie recovered first. "Remember yourselves," she said sharply. "The Alpha King will see an ancient rite carried out according to sacred law. Nothing more." She fixed the crowd with a warning glance. "Anyone who embarrasses this pack will answer to me." Fear silenced them again. Yet Evelyn noticed something Marjorie did not. The sacred tree had grown perfectly still. The branches no longer trembled in the rain. They were listening. A few moments later, dark figures emerged between the pines. Royal guards advanced first in disciplined formation, their black cloaks marked with silver wolves. Behind them walked Silas Rook, the king's beta, observant enough to study every frightened face before looking anywhere else. His gaze swept across the candles, the ritual circle, the tightened vines, then settled briefly on the glowing roots beneath Evelyn's feet. His expression hardened. Then Rowan Blackthorn stepped into the grove. Conversation ceased so completely that even the rain seemed louder. He was taller than every wolf present, dressed in black travel leathers darkened by the storm, his silver eyes calm enough to make everyone else's fear obvious. Every wolf bowed except Evelyn. She could not. The vines still held her against the sacred tree. Rowan ignored every formal greeting Marjorie hurried to offer. He ignored Caleb's stiff salute. Instead, he inhaled once, slowly. His gaze lifted toward the ancient tree, then moved to Evelyn. Something invisible shifted across his face. Not recognition. Memory. A scent carried through the rain, impossibly familiar. Wild herbs. Fresh earth. White blossoms after a storm. He had breathed that fragrance only once before, nearly 2 decades earlier, while a wounded boy drifted in and out of consciousness beneath white branches as a gentle healer whispered that no child should die because adults chose violence. His heartbeat slowed. The woman was gone. He knew that. Yet the same quiet scent lingered around the frightened Omega before him, wrapped inside the silver locket resting over her heart. Rowan stepped forward without asking permission. Every instinct told him the pack feared the wrong person. His eyes lingered on the vines cutting into Evelyn's wrists, then on the sacred tree itself. The bark beneath her hands showed no sign of rejecting her. Quite the opposite. The roots curved toward her bare feet, as though shielding them from the cold earth. Rowan had spent his entire life studying old laws, sacred places, and forgotten traditions. Sacred trees never protected sacrifices. They protected their keepers. That realization struck him before anyone spoke a single word. His expression turned colder than the rain. Without taking his eyes from Evelyn, he asked in a voice so calm it unsettled every wolf in the grove. Who decided that the one person the sacred tree is trying to protect should be the one tied to it? No one answered Rowan Blackthorn. The silence that settled over Briar Hollow felt heavier than the storm itself. Rain slid from the sacred tree in slow silver threads, while every pair of eyes remained fixed on the Alpha King. Rowan did not look at the frightened crowd. He looked only at Evelyn Hartwell. The living vines had carved angry red marks around her wrists and shoulders. One coiled across her collarbone, pinning the silver locket against her skin with needless cruelty. His gaze lingered there for only a heartbeat, but something inside him tightened. Sacred law had never been meant to humiliate the innocent. Marjorie Voss recovered first. Drawing herself to her full height, she offered a respectful bow that failed to hide the tension in her voice. "Your Majesty, you have arrived during an ancient rite. Everything you see has been done according to the laws handed down through generations." Rowan remained silent for a long moment. The quiet unsettled the grove more than anger ever could. At last he asked, Do your ancestors also command you to bind a woman who cannot defend herself? Marjorie did not answer immediately. Caleb stepped forward instead. The sacred tree has been dying for years, he said. Children have fallen ill. Crops have failed. We acted for the survival of the pack. Rowan finally turned toward him. Survival built upon fear is only a slower way to destroy a people. Caleb's jaw tightened, but no words came. Beside Rowan, Silas Rook accepted the ritual book from Elder Amos without resistance. He quietly began reading, saying nothing while the pages whispered beneath the rain. Rowan stepped closer to Evelyn until only a few feet separated them. Tell me your name. There was no command in his voice, only respect. Evelyn hesitated. It had been years since anyone had asked her name as though it mattered. Evelyn Hartwell. The surname lingered in the air. Hartwell. Rowan felt something stir deep within a memory he could not yet fully reach. White blossoms. Rain. Gentle hands stained with crushed herbs. A woman's calm voice refusing a reward she had every right to claim. Before the memory could surface completely, Marjorie spoke again. Her mother filled her mind with dangerous beliefs. Mara Hartwell claimed she alone understood the sacred tree. Evelyn met Rowan's eyes. My mother never wanted power, she whispered. She only wanted people to stop being afraid. Rowan studied her face. There was exhaustion, grief, quiet dignity, but not deception. Behind him, June Pike clutched Noah tightly, the little boy sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. Tessa stepped forward, her hands trembling. Your Majesty, Evelyn helped him. She never asked for anything in return. Rowan glanced toward the child, then back to Evelyn. Did you? She lowered her eyes. Years of blame had taught her that honesty often invited punishment. Yet she could not deny the truth. I tried. The sacred tree answered before anyone else could. Pale light rippled beneath the roots, circling Evelyn's bare feet. Instead of tightening around her, the ancient roots curved closer as though shielding her from the cold earth. Rowan watched without speaking. Every lesson preserved in the royal archives echoed through his mind. Sacred trees did not protect sacrifices. They protected their keepers. Marjorie saw the realization settle across his face, and for the first time that night genuine fear entered her eyes. Do not interfere, she warned. If those vines are cut before dawn, every death that follows will rest upon the crown. The grove felt utterly still. Rowan looked at Evelyn once more. Even now, bound and exhausted, she shook her head ever so slightly. Please, she whispered, do not carry that burden because of me. Rowan's expression softened in a way no one present had ever seen. No one, he said quietly, should have taught you that being rescued is something to apologize for. The words settled over the grove with the weight of truth. Caleb lowered his eyes. Even Elder Amos could no longer look at Evelyn without shame. Rowan reached slowly toward the obsidian dagger resting at his side. He drew it with calm certainty, the black blade reflecting the pale light of the sacred tree. Royal guards instinctively straightened, but none moved. Silas closed the ritual book. Marjorie took an involuntary step backward. Rowan crossed the circle of ancient stones and placed one boot upon the sacred roots, choosing compassion over fear in full view of the entire pack. Then, without hesitation or ceremony, he raised the obsidian blade toward the first living vine around Evelyn's wrist. If your laws demand the innocent suffer, he said, his voice carrying through the silent forest, then tonight your laws end with me. Was dark as midnight glass, marked with the royal crest near the hilt, but he held it not like a weapon, not like a king displaying power, but like a man approaching something wounded and sacred. Your Majesty, Elder Amos whispered, the vines are part of the rite. Rowan did not take his eyes off Evelyn. No, he said, they are part of the lie. He lifted the first vine from her wrist with a care that made her chest ache more than the binding. No one had touched her gently since her mother died. The blade slid through the green coil in one clean motion, and the severed piece fell into the mud without a sound. Evelyn inhaled sharply as blood returned to her fingers in a rush of pins and heat. The tree trembled above them. Marjorie stepped forward. Stop him. No guard moved. Silas Rook's hand rested on his sword, quiet but unmistakable, and every wolf in Briar Hollow remembered suddenly that royal law had teeth. Rowan cut the second vine. This one had crossed Evelyn's waist, holding her so tightly she had forgotten what a full breath felt like. When it fell, she swayed forward. Rowan caught her shoulder with his free hand, steadying her without claiming more than she could bear. "Easy," he murmured. The word was not for the pack. It was only for her. Evelyn hated that her eyes filled with tears. She had survived insults, hunger, loneliness, years of being treated like a stain on the floorboards, but kindness in front of those who had denied her humanity almost broke her. "The roots will darken," Caleb said, desperation cracking his voice. "You do not know what you are doing." Rowan looked at him then. "I know exactly what a frightened man sounds like when he calls cruelty duty." Caleb recoiled as if struck, though Rowan had not raised his hand. The third vine lay across Evelyn's collarbone, trapping the locket against her heart. As Rowan brought the dagger near it, the silver oval opened by itself with a soft click. The pressed leaf inside glowed pale gold. A ripple passed through the sacred tree, not anger, not hunger, but recognition. Elder Amos stared at the locket, his face draining. "Mara," he breathed. Evelyn turned her head despite the pain. "What did you say?" The elder's mouth trembled shut. Marjorie's voice cut in, too sharp. "Old men mumble at night. Cut nothing else." Rowan's eyes narrowed. He had heard. So had Silas. "Beta Rook," Rowan said. "Find out why that name frightens them." Silas moved immediately toward the elder, but Evelyn barely saw him. Her gaze was fixed on the locket, on the tiny leaf her mother had protected as if it were more precious than silver. Rowan cut the vine over her chest. The moment it fell, light flowed from the locket into the bark behind her. The sacred tree answered in a low, living hum that moved through the soil and up through every bone in the grove. Candles flared blue-white. The rotting black lines at the base of the trunk pulled back, only an inch, but enough for everyone to see. A woman in the crowd whispered, "She is healing it." "No," Marjorie snapped. "She is feeding on it." Tessa stepped out fully now, rain running down her face with her tears. Then why did the tree brighten when he freed her? The question broke something open. Murmurs rose, uncertain and frightened, no longer obedient. Rowan cut the vine pinning Evelyn's right hand, then the left. Each severed coil fell like a judgment. With every cut, Evelyn felt pain leave, but something else entered. Memory without images, her mother's hands in damp soil, a lullaby under white branches, a warning whispered too late. The final vine was wrapped around her throat, loose enough to spare her breath, tight enough to remind everyone what they had allowed. Rowan's face changed when he saw the market left. His calm became something colder. "This one," he said softly, "was never sacred." He cut it last. The vine dropped, and Evelyn collapsed forward into freedom. Rowan caught her before her knees hit the roots. Behind them, the sacred tree burst into light, and hidden beneath its bark, words burned slowly into view. Mara Hartwell was keeper of the root. Her daughter is not the curse. She is the heir. The last severed vine lay motionless among the roots, but no one in Briar Hollow dared move. The sacred tree no longer blazed with impossible light. Instead, it breathed with a quiet radiance, its white bark warm beneath Evelyn Hartwell's trembling fingertips, as though welcoming home someone it had waited years to embrace. The silence carried more weight than any celebration ever could. Elder Amos took one uncertain step forward before his strength failed him. He fell to his knees in the rain, his hands shaking so violently that the old ritual staff slipped from his grasp. For years he had hidden behind tradition. Now there was nowhere left to hide. "Forgive me," he whispered, though he no longer knew whether he was speaking to the sacred tree, to Mara Hartwell, or to the young woman standing before him. Marjorie Voss's voice cut sharply across the grove. "Stand up, elder. Do not disgrace your office." Amos slowly lifted his head. The fear that had ruled him for nearly a decade had finally broken. "The disgrace," he said quietly, "began the day we buried the truth." Every eye turned toward him. Even the rain seemed to soften. Silas Rook stepped beside the elder, holding the weathered journal recovered from the hidden compartment inside the ritual archive. Without speaking, he offered it to Rowan. The Alpha King looked at the worn leather cover only briefly before shaking his head. "Not to me," he said. "It belongs to her." He turned and placed the journal gently into Evelyn's hands. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Pressed between the first pages rested a single white leaf, still carrying the faint fragrance of herbs despite the passing years. Beneath it, Written in graceful ink she recognized instantly, were the words she had dreamed of hearing since childhood. Asterisk, if you are reading this, little bird, then I was not able to stay beside you. Never believe anyone who tells you the sacred tree demands your suffering. It has always answered love freely given, never fear forced upon the innocent. Asterisk, Evelyn closed her eyes. Her mother's voice seemed to live inside every line. The ache she had carried for 9 lonely years did not disappear, but it changed. For the first time, grief no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like being loved across time. Elder Amos drew a slow, unsteady breath. Mara Hartwell was chosen keeper of the root. He confessed before the entire pack. When she died, the sacred tree accepted her daughter as its rightful heir. We feared the pack would never trust a 13-year-old Omega, so we buried Mara's record and told ourselves the lie was necessary. Caleb stared at his mother in disbelief. You knew? Marjorie's silence answered him before her words ever could. The pack needed certainty, she finally said. Fear was easier than hope. Rowan looked at her with quiet disappointment rather than anger. Hope asks leaders to be brave, he said. Fear only asks them to find someone else to blame. Evelyn looked down at the journal once more. Tears slipped silently onto its weathered pages. She never wanted power, she whispered. She only wanted everyone to stop being afraid. Rowan's gaze rested on the silver locket around Evelyn's neck. At last the memory he had carried for nearly 20 years unfolded with perfect clarity. Rain falling through white branches. A gentle healer kneeling beside an injured royal boy whose life hung by a thread. Mara Hartwell had pressed healing herbs against his wound and smiled when he tried to offer her gold. If you ever become the kind of man others must follow, she had told him, asterisk, remember that real strength is gentle. Asterisk, Rowan lowered his head for a single heartbeat. Your mother saved my life, he said softly. Evelyn looked at him in stunned silence. Before either of them could speak again, little Noah Pike slipped free from his mother's hand and wandered toward the sacred tree. He stopped beside Evelyn without fear and reached for her hand with innocent trust. She smiled through her tears and gently took his small fingers in hers. The breeze stirred. Thousands of white blossoms opened quietly throughout the ancient branches, drifting down like soft snow over the grove. No voice came from the tree. No glowing words appeared upon its bark. None were needed anymore. The truth had finally been spoken by those who had hidden it, witnessed by those who had feared it, and accepted by the one woman who had carried its burden all along. Rowan stepped beside Evelyn, not before her, not behind her, simply at her side. Across the grove, every wolf understood that the age built upon fear had ended. What came next would depend not upon a king, nor upon an ancient law, but upon the choice of the keeper who had never truly been forgotten. Silver light lingered among the branches long after the words upon the sacred tree faded from view. No wolf moved. The grove had become a place where excuses could no longer survive. Evelyn slowly lowered her hands from the ancient bark, her breathing still uneven, while the warmth flowing through the roots gradually settled into quiet peace. For the first time since her mother's death, the tree no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like home. Around her, faces she had known all her life refused to meet her eyes. Mothers who had once pulled their children away from her now held them a little closer, not because they feared Evelyn, but because they feared the memory of what they had allowed. Elder Amos stepped forward first. His knees sank into the wet earth before anyone expected him to kneel. He removed the elder's pendant from around his neck and laid it upon the roots. I carried this symbol while abandoning the duty it represented, he said, his voice breaking. Before the sacred tree, before the crown, and before Mara Hartwell's daughter, I confess my failure. Evelyn looked down at the old man. 9 years of loneliness could not disappear because of one apology. Yet she also saw something she had never witnessed in him before. Not authority. Humility. Stand, she said gently. Amos hesitated. Not because you deserve forgiveness today, Evelyn continued, but because you still have work to do tomorrow. The old elder wept openly as he rose. One by one, others followed, not to worship her, not because Rowan ordered them. They bowed because they could no longer pretend they had done nothing. Tessa Whitcomb stepped beside Evelyn, tears shining in her eyes. I cannot change the years I stayed silent. No, Evelyn answered. Neither can I. She reached for Tessa's trembling hand. But silence ends somewhere. Let it end with us. Tessa nodded through quiet tears. Across the clearing, Marjorie Voss remained standing. Pride was all she had left, and she clung to it with desperate strength. You all forget too easily, she said, her voice echoing across the grove. Fear kept this pack alive. They followed me because fear works. Rowan Blackthorn finally turned toward her. There was no anger in his face now, only certainty. Fear makes wolves obey, he said quietly. It has never taught them how to protect one another. Marjorie laughed once, hollow and tired. Then tell me, Your Majesty, what should become of me? Rowan did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Evelyn. Every wolf in Briar Hollow followed his gaze. The wrong was done to her, he said. Justice begins by giving back the choice that was stolen. Evelyn felt hundreds of eyes settle upon her. But for the first time, their attention no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like responsibility. She studied Marjorie for a long moment. Hatred would have been easy. After everything that had been taken, no one would have blamed her. But hatred had ruled Briar Hollow long enough. Let the Northern Council judge what she has done, Evelyn said at last. Not because I wish her suffering, but because every child growing up here deserves to learn that power answers to truth. Rowan inclined his head, accepting her decision without altering a single word. So it shall be. Royal guards stepped forward with calm dignity. Marjorie did not resist. As they led her away, she glanced back once toward the sacred tree. The fear she had spent years feeding had abandoned her at last. Caleb lowered his head before following behind the guards. He stopped only long enough to face Evelyn. I believe protecting my place was the same as protecting my people. Evelyn held his gaze without bitterness. Now you know the difference. He nodded once, unable to speak, and walked on. The grove grew quiet again. Noah Pike slipped from his mother's hand and wandered toward Evelyn with the innocent courage only children possess. He offered her a tiny white wildflower he had picked near the roots. Mama says heroes are not scary, he whispered. Evelyn accepted the flower with trembling fingers. She smiled, and somewhere above them the sacred tree answered with the soft rustle of thousands of blossoms opening together. Rowan watched the scene in silence. More than any miracle he had witnessed that night, it was this simple moment that convinced him Briar Hollow had finally begun to heal. Dawn painted the eastern sky with pale gold, and Evelyn lifted her eyes toward the growing light. She no longer wondered whether she belonged beneath the sacred tree. The only question left was where the path beyond it might lead. Morning arrived quietly over Briar Hollow. Sunlight slipped through the white branches of the sacred tree, touching the rain-soaked earth where fear had ruled only hours before. The scars upon the ancient trunk remained, not as wounds, but as reminders that healing did not erase the past. It transformed it. The wolves gathered once more beneath the spreading branches, but this time no one stood above Evelyn Hartwell. No one spoke for her. They simply waited. Elder Amos approached, carrying the restored journal with both hands. He stopped before Evelyn and bowed deeply, not to an Omega, but to the keeper of the root. The sacred tree has found its guardian again, he said. What will become of Briar Hollow now? Evelyn looked slowly around the grove. She saw June Pike holding Noah's hand. She saw Tessa Whitcomb standing without shame for the first time in years. She saw empty spaces where fear had once stood taller than kindness. Finally, she lifted her eyes to the ancient tree. It will heal, she said softly. Not because it has forgotten what happened here, but because neither truth nor mercy can grow where lies continue to live. Her words settled gently over the pack. One by one, wolves lowered their heads, not in worship, but in acknowledgement of the woman they had failed. No command had forced them. They had chosen it for themselves. Rowan Blackthorn watched in silence. It was the moment he had hoped for from the instant he stepped into the grove. Justice had not been achieved because a king had spoken. It had begun because a forgotten voice had finally been heard. Royal guards quietly escorted Marjorie Voss and Caleb away to face judgment before the Northern Council. Neither resisted. Their fate would be decided by law rather than anger, and Briar Hollow would remember that justice and vengeance were not the same thing. When the last of the villagers drifted home, only Rowan and Evelyn remained beneath the sacred tree. The morning breeze carried the faint fragrance of herbs and white blossoms. Evelyn rested one hand upon her silver locket, feeling the pressed green leaf beside the blossom the tree had given her. Her mother's memory no longer felt like a weight she carried alone. It had become a path she could choose to follow. Rowan stepped closer, leaving a respectful distance between them. The Northern Territories would welcome their keeper, he said quietly. You could help restore sacred places that have been forgotten, just as this one was. He paused before adding, or you may remain here, or choose a road neither of us has imagined. Whatever you decide, it will be your decision. Evelyn searched his face. All her life, others had spoken of destiny as though it were another kind of chain. Rowan offered nothing of the sort. He offered freedom. Slowly, a smile softened her features. For the first time, she said, I do not have to choose between duty and myself. Rowan returned the smile, warm and unguarded. Then choose neither today. He extended his hand, not as a king giving an order, but as one traveler inviting another to walk beside him. He did not move closer. He waited. Evelyn looked once toward the place where the living vines had held her prisoner through the longest night of her life. Then she stepped forward of her own free will and placed her hand in his. At that same quiet moment, every severed vine lying across the sacred roots blossomed into delicate white flowers. The wind carried their petals through the morning light, covering the ground where fear had finally lost its hold. Years later, the wolves of Briar Hollow would remember the night the Alpha King cut every vine. But what they treasured most was not the courage of a king. It was the day a forgotten Omega taught an entire pack that true strength is never measured by the power to bind another soul, but by the courage to set it free.